Today, we're really getting into a foundational text. Barack Obama's bestseller, The Audacity of Hope. Thoughts on reclaiming the American dream.
Exactly. We're going deeper, looking at how Obama, as a senator, lawyer, professor, father, Christian, and interestingly, a skeptic, explores some really core themes.
Yeah, things like empathy, renewing democratic ideals, and just the really gritty realities of political life. So what does it all mean for understanding the bigger picture?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with Obama's road to public service. His first jump into politics was at 35, running for the Illinois legislature.
Right, and he describes himself then as pretty impatient, coming from that background as a civil rights lawyer, community organizer. He really hit the ground running.
Totally grassroots, wasn't it? Talking to absolutely anyone who listened, block clubs, beauty shops.
He even mentions crossing the street just to hand out literature.
And he found two questions kept coming up again and again.
Who are you and what do you want? Pretty fundamental stuff.
Then, fast forward 6 years, he decides to run for the U.S. Senate. But he talks about having, well, significant self-doubt initially.
Yeah, even with the successes in the state legislature, like death penalty reform, expanding health programs, he found the meaner tasks of politics were really starting to get to him.
What kind of thing?
Oh, the constant fundraising, he calls it begging for money, the endless drives, the bad food, and he's quite candid about the strain on his family.
He mentions his wife, Michelle.
He does. He says she was pretty fed up with raising our children alone and really questioning his priorities. It sounds like a really difficult time.
And he felt the state work was becoming, less impactful.
Too incremental is how he put it, sort of removed from the bigger national battles over taxes, security, healthcare, the things really shaping the country.
And that Senate primary, the odds were really stacked against him.
Oh, massively. A Republican incumbent who'd spent millions plus 6 primary opponents.
Including some heavy hitters, right? A state controller, a multimillionaire.
Exactly. A real uphill battle. He talks about tireless travel, often alone, relying on friends to pull together these small gatherings.
Sometimes just a couple of people.
Yeah, maybe only 2 or 3 people showing up. Imagine that.
But he says something really interesting came out of those conversations.
He did. He found people's hopes were surprisingly modest. Across all demographics, race, region, religion, class, he heard the same core desires.
Like what?
A living wage, decent health care, good schools for their kids, safety, some dignity in retirement, basic things.
And people weren't expecting miracles from government.
No, he says they understood government couldn't solve every problem, but they absolutely believed it should help with these fundamental needs. That broad consensus really struck him.
It also threw the role of money in politics into sharp relief.
Oh, absolutely. His state races cost maybe $100,000. The Senate, we're talking millions. $5 million just for the primary, maybe 10 to 15 million more for the general.
A different league entirely. He mentioned seeing one opponent's signs everywhere.
Blair Hall, yeah. Ubiquitous lawn signs, constant TV ads, just showing the sheer power of money.
And Obama reflects on how that need for money subtly changes things for politicians.
It does. It inevitably creates a bit of distance, he suggests, from the other 99% of the population. It can shift your focus, even unintentionally.
And then there's the pressure from interest groups.
Huge pressure. Filling out endless questionnaires, needing specific answers to get endorsements. He talks about losing some endorsements because he wouldn't toe the line.
But also gaining some unexpected ones.
Right, like the AFL-CIO endorsing someone else due to old ties, but then some service worker unions actually broke ranks and backed him. A risky move for them, but critical for his campaign.
So from his own campaign experiences, he then kind of zooms out to look at the bigger picture of American democracy.
Yeah, the deep partisan divides. He doesn't pull any punches describing the vehement disagreements, the vitriol over issues like Iraq, taxes, abortion, climate change.
He even gives an example from his time in the Illinois Senate.
He does, how both Republican and Democratic majorities, when they had power, adopted these absolute control tactics. It led to implacable anger, he says, and those memories of bipartisan dinners just faded away.
And Washington was even more intense.
Much more, where even small differences in perspective are magnified by party loyalty, constant campaigning, and crucially, the media.
Let's talk about the media. He has some really sharp observations there.
He really does. The math is kind of shocking. A 3-minute local news story reaches way more people, maybe 200,000, than a senator might connect with directly over a whole term.
Wow, so politicians become
entirely dependent on the media, as he puts it. It becomes the filter for their image.
Which leads to politicians managing that image very carefully.
Exactly. Self-censorship, scripted, candid moments, trying to fit into these well-worn narratives. The media likes the rising star, the maverick, whatever. Focus shifts to personality and conflict, not nuanced policy.
And he points out a paradox with objectivity in reporting.
Yeah, that reporters often just present the talking points of different sides without really digging into the facts, which makes it incredibly hard to find even rough agreement on the facts.
Without agreed upon facts.
Thoughtful compromise becomes almost impossible. There's no common ground to start from.
He also talks about a deeper shift,
Okay.
a generational change in political values.
Right. Moving from that post-World War II era where there was maybe more shared trust, leaders who'd served together.
To the post-Vietnam era.
Exactly. Where various outsiders started asserting their rights, challenging the status quo. He argues this shift kind of paved the way for Ronald Reagan's very durable narrative.
The one framing critic says.
As out-of-touch, tax and spend, blame America first, politically correct elites. A very effective political framing that lasted a long time.
And Obama observed what he calls a kind of absolutism in the GOP at that time.
Yes, in several areas. Free market absolutism, religious absolutism, and this belief that the majority's will should basically override checks and balances.
The Democrats.
He describes the party as more confused, sort of caught between defending old programs and pushing these smaller incremental ideas, but lacking a really clear, overarching governing philosophy.
Which leads into a pretty critical question.
Yeah. In a climate where ideological purity and rigid orthodoxy seem to rule, how do you actually build that broad majority of Americans needed for real national renewal?
It's a tough question. He finds some answers, or at least a framework, in the Constitution itself.
Right. He sees it as a living document, not something static. Its elaborate machinery, he says, is actually designed to force us into a conversation, into what he calls a deliberative democracy.
So embracing the complexity, the debate.
Exactly. He highlights how the founders rejected absolute authority, absolute truth. They valued realism, practicality, flexibility.
He also addresses the Constitution's compromise on slavery.
He does, acknowledging it as a deeply problematic but perhaps politically necessary compromise at the time to even form the Union. But crucially, it still provided the framework for later amendments to fix that terrible injustice.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the economy and this idea of reclaiming the American dream.
Yeah, Obama really digs into how globalization, while beneficial in some ways, has created a lot more economic instability for millions of ordinary Americans.
Also,
Companies automating, downsizing, offshoring, essentially shifting costs and risks onto workers. This creates what he calls a winner-take-all economy.
where you see strong overall growth, but
But anemic job growth, flatlining wages, and workers getting a smaller and smaller piece of the profit pie.
he uses the example of tech founders versus other workers.
Right. Knowledge workers, like, say, the Google founders, with unique skills reap massive rewards. But people whose skills can be automated or outsourced face a much tougher future, often in low-wage service jobs.
And foreign competition plays a big role too.
Definitely. Other countries graduating far more engineers, and America's increasing reliance on foreign students for skilled labor, especially after 9/11 visa issues, pushed some firms to move R&D to India and China.
But he argues government has historically played a role in creating opportunity, right?
Absolutely. He traces it back. Hamilton liberating capital, Jefferson pushing for public education, Lincoln's commitment to free labor and big infrastructure projects like the railroad, land-grant colleges.
Things that built an integrated economy and created ladders of opportunity.
Exactly. And then, of course, FDR's New Deal during the Great Depression, creating that social compact, Social Security, labor laws, minimum wage, unions. He argues it essentially saved capitalism from itself.
And that model worked for decades.
Led to widespread prosperity, helped build the middle class, until, he argues, Reagan fundamentally changed the terms of the political debate with the tax revolt and anti-government message.
And now he says that compact is kind of crumbling.
Yeah. Companies shifting healthcare and retirement costs onto employees, stagnant wages, high debt. He criticizes the Bush administration's ownership society idea for encouraging these trends through tax cuts and deregulation.
So what's his alternative? What's the path to a new consensus?
Well, he proposes several things. Raising the minimum wage, he notes it hadn't been changed in 9 years then and had less buying power than in 1955. Preserving Social Security's solvency, maybe using that bipartisan Reagan-O'Neill approach from the 80s as a model.
And healthcare reform was clearly a major focus for him.
Huge. He envisioned a nonpartisan body, something like the Institute of Medicine, defining a basic, high-quality plan focused on prevention, then allowing public and private plans to compete in new marketplaces, and mandating electronic records to cut costs and errors.
Beyond that, he emphasizes key investments for competitiveness.
Right. Education is central, improving K-12, focusing on good teachers as the single most important factor, making college affordable, he talks about his own student debt, and boosting federal support for university research.
And science and tech funding.
Critical. He points to the decline in federal funding for basic research and argues for doubling it, training more scientists and engineers.
Energy is another big
A
one.
really big one. He calls America's dependence on oil an addiction and says flatly, we can't drill our way out of the problem. He pushes for much higher fuel efficiency standards, pointing to Japanese competitors.
He connects energy independence to national security, too, doesn't he?
Yes, using Ukraine's reliance on Russian gas as a cautionary tale about how energy dependence can really compromise a nation's future.
And then there's that really pointed question from Warren Buffett he includes.
Yes. Why do the super wealthy often pay lower effective tax rates than their receptionists?
Because of how investment income is taxed versus wages.
Yes, exactly. Buffett's point, as Obama relates it, is that the market doesn't automatically distribute rewards fairly, and those who've benefited most should contribute more, acknowledging their success depends heavily on the society they live in. It really gets you thinking about shared prosperity.
It does. Okay, let's move into what Obama calls America's soul values, identity, and particularly empathy.
Empathy is huge for him. He calls it the heart of my moral code. His way of understanding the golden rule. It's about trying to stand in somebody else's shoes and see through their eyes.
He mentions his mother influencing this.
Yeah, she always asks him, how do you think that would make you feel? He believes that kind of empathy could help tilt the balance of politics towards people who are struggling, but it also means understanding those who are better off, too.
He famously declared in his 2004 DNC speech, there is not a Black America and white America.
And Latino America and Asian America, there's the United States of America. He connects this to his own mixed heritage and what he sees as America's genius for absorbing newcomers, forging a single identity despite really dark chapters like Jim Crow or Japanese internment.
He shares a story from his Senate campaign that illustrates this hope for racial trust.
The visit to Cairo, Illinois, a town with a really painful history of racial conflict, yet he arrives to find a multiracial crowd wearing his campaign buttons. He describes it as tentative but powerful.
He also talks about the growing Black and Latino middle classes.
Yeah, seeing that as a quintessentially American path of upward mobility, but also acknowledging the persistent racial gaps that still exist.
And how to address those gaps.
He suggests enforcing non-discrimination laws, maybe targeted affirmative action like scholarships for minorities in STEM fields. But interestingly, he emphasizes that universal programs like better healthcare for everyone would likely do more to close racial disparities than solely race-specific programs.
He doesn't shy away from difficult conversations within communities either.
No, he mentions the frank acknowledgement in the African-American community about tough issues like infant mortality or male unemployment in inner cities, contrasting structural explanations with conservative framings of cultural pathologies.
And he discusses the tensions that could arise between different minority groups.
Right. Specifically, the rising tensions he saw between Black and Latino communities in Chicago as the Latino population grew, leading to shifts in political power and competition for low-wage jobs. He notes how some Black residents felt threatened.
He's also quite candid about immigration issues.
Very. He acknowledges the anxieties and nativist sentiments around illegal immigration, even admitting to his own occasional flush of patriotic resentment seeing Mexican flags or frustration using a translator. He points out the cynicism of employers who prefer immigrants because they supposedly work harder.
But his ultimate concern isn't being overrun.
No. The real danger, he argues, is failing to recognize the basic humanity of immigrants and allowing inequality to deepen along racial lines.
Let's touch on faith. This was a complex area for him personally and politically.
It really was. He describes a non-religious upbringing, rational grandmother, atheist father. But he was drawn to the historically Black church.
Why?
For its power to drive social change, its way of ministering to the whole person, connecting individual salvation with collective action, challenging powers and principalities.
And he found another key insight there.
Yes, what he calls the second insight. That faith doesn't mean you don't have doubts or that you let go of the real world. It acknowledges human flaws and offers companionship on a difficult journey.
He also addresses the political influence of the Christian right.
He does, acknowledging their feeling of being mocked and under attack by cultural shifts and court decisions,
Right.
and how they found an ally in the Republican Party.
And he criticizes progressives for sometimes avoiding religious language.
Yeah, he calls it bad politics, arguing that if you create a vacuum, others will fill it. He insists secularists are wrong to ask believers to check their faith at the door.
Because faith has driven so much positive change.
Exactly. He points out that faith motivated the majority of great reformers in American history, and that law itself is often a codification of morality.
So how should faith be discussed in public life?
He suggests some ground rules. Resist imputing bad faith to opponents. Look for consistency in applying values like, are you as outraged about homelessness as you are about music videos? And try to discern when the state should step in versus leaving things to individual conscience.
Okay, let's pivot to America's place in the world and foreign policy. He argues the threats have fundamentally changed since the Cold War.
Right. Post 9/11, the big threats aren't necessarily expansionist states anymore, but these transnational challenges. Terrorist networks, pandemics, climate change.
Which raises a big question about military spending.
A huge question. If the U.S. military budget, like the $522 billion it was in 2005, is built for World War III, but the threats are different, how should strategy adapt, especially when that budget dwarfed the next 30 countries combined?
He was famously skeptical about the Iraq War from the beginning.
Very skeptical back in 2002. He didn't see Saddam's threat as imminent, felt the rationales were flimsy and ideologically driven, and worried Afghanistan was far from complete. He saw it as choosing precipitous, unilateral military action over the hard slog of diplomacy.
And his visit to Iraq later confirmed some of those concerns.
It seems so. He describes the disconnect between the green zone bubble, troops feeling the press only reported bad news, and foreign correspondents seeing widespread sectarian violence and instability that elections alone wouldn't fix.
So his view on using military force is nuanced.
It is. He believes the U.S. has the right to act unilaterally against an imminent threat. Al-Qaeda, yes. Saddam's Iraq, no. But, he argues, it's almost always in our strategic interest to act multilaterally.
Why is multilateralism so important?
Because the U.S. ultimately benefits most from stable international rules of the road. By agreeing to restrain its own power sometimes and follow norms, America strengthens those rules and undermines the argument from terrorists or dictators that they're just tools of American power.
He also talks about the importance of helping other nations develop.
Yeah, echoing JFK's promise to help those struggling against mass misery simply because it is right. He defends the free market system against charges of imperialism, arguing it still offers the best chance for a better life through its openness.
But he also calls out American hypocrisy.
He does, demanding developing countries drop trade barriers while protecting U.S. industries, or prioritizing drug patents over getting generic AIDS drugs to millions who need them.
And the danger of failed states.
He highlights how disorder breeds disorder, creating havens for terrorists, breeding grounds for disease. It's a global security issue.
So the solution is partly about America leading differently.
Leading by example is how he puts it. Perfecting our own democracy, upholding human rights, avoiding things like indefinite detention or torture, raising fuel standards to fight climate change. Our credibility depends on living up to our ideals.
He mentions the positive impact of the tsunami relief effort.
Right, in Indonesia, how that aid significantly improved perceptions of the U.S., showing the power of a helping hand.
Finally, let's get into the more personal side of the book, the intersection of public life and family.
Yeah, he's very open about the juggling act of modern parenthood, the strains in his marriage to Michelle, especially after their daughter Malia was born and careers got more intense, financial pressures, needing childcare.
He even mentions arguments, Michelle feeling he wasn't doing enough.
He does. He talks about her accusations and his initial defensiveness, thinking, his love should be sufficient.
But he came to a different understanding.
A profound one, it seems. That when children showed up, it was Michelle and not I who was expected to make the necessary adjustments. She bore the brunt of career sacrifices, the daily grind of childcare.
And he connects this to a wider reality for many families.
Absolutely, the juggler family. He cites stats like 70% of families having two working parents or a single working parent, and parents having significantly less time with kids than a generation before.
And often, mom's paycheck is what keeps the family afloat.
Right. Preventing them from falling out of the middle class, often going directly towards investments in their children's future, preschool, saving for college, trying to afford a home in a safe area.
This leads him to reflect on his own role as a father in public life.
Yeah, with a lot of self-doubt, acknowledging the gap between that old image of the 1950s father and his own compromised reality.
He talks about the
The guilt of his ridiculous schedule, missing school events. He calls the rationalization that his work makes the world better for his daughters feeble and painfully abstract. He even shares Michelle joking that seeing his picture in the paper is probably just embarrassing for the kids.
There's a cute story about Sasha's birthday party, too.
Oh, yeah, where his main jobs were getting balloons and pizza, and Sasha critiques his color choices, declaring, "Pink and blue don't go together." Just a little dose of reality.
And Malia's comment about not wanting to be rich.
Right, at 6 years old, saying she wanted a simple life. It clearly made him pause and wonder what his daughters made of his not-so-simple life and his own shortcomings.
So wrapping it all up, the title itself, The Audacity of Hope. Where does that come from?
It's a phrase from his pastor at the time, Reverend Jeremiah Wright.
And what does it mean to Obama?
He defines it as the best of the American spirit. It's the audacity, the sheer nerve to believe you can restore community despite conflict, to believe you have some control over your own fate even when things are tough. It's about holding on to hope against the odds.
A powerful theme running through the whole book.
Definitely. He reflects on the difference between his relatively anonymous earlier life and his public one, admitting his views aren't necessarily more refined now, but his wisdom comes from seeing politics for good and for ill.
So we've taken quite a deep dive into the audacity of hope. We've looked at Obama's political journey, his thoughts on American governance, the economy, values, identity.
Right, and how his personal experiences really shaped his vision for a more empathetic America and his approach to global challenges. It's quite a sweeping look.
And the book really underscores that this work, renewing the country, engaging with the world, it's messy, it's full of contradictions, but it's also ongoing. It never really ends.
It's a constant process, a constant striving, perhaps.
So, as you, our listener, reflect on all this, here's a final thought to consider. In a world that feels increasingly divided, where the pressures on leaders are just immense, what does that phrase, the audacity of hope, truly mean to you today?
And maybe, how can each of us contribute in our own ways to building the kind of consensus and shared purpose that Obama argues in this book America so desperately needs something to think about?